Hi everyone, and welcome to our continuation of the development unit. We are in 3.2b today. So we're going to talk about physical development across the lifespan, adolescence and adulthood. Here are your learning objectives, and here are your vocab. So how do we define adolescence? Adolescence we define as the transition period from childhood to adulthood. And this is extending from puberty, really, to adulthood. And in some cultures, where teens are self-supporting, adolescence as a concept that we've just defined doesn't really exist. G. Hanley Stahl was one of the first psychologists to describe adolescence, and he felt that it was a period of storm and stress. However, most people do not feel that adolescence is really a time of storm and stress for them. Starting from that puberty moment, let's define puberty. Puberty is the time that humans mature sexually. So hormones are changing and it's triggering bodily changes, and it's a sequence, again, of physical developments. Remember, like just in our newborns and our young babies had that fine motor and gross motor development timeline. There is a series of things that's going to happen when puberty hits, right? And it's predictable. The sequence of things is more predictable than the exact time. It can happen as early as 9 years old, as late as 16 years old. The first menarche is the first menstrual period that a woman has. And so that's kind of like marks the beginning of puberty for girls. And during adolescence, your brain is continuing to prune, which means it is doing that use it or lose it thing, pruning those unused synaptic connections. So when you look at a baby that's 6 months and 2 years old, look at all these dense synaptic connections, and then by 6 years old you can see synaptic pruning has happened. Okay, so in adolescence there's a bunch of social changes, and parental control is naturally weakening as people are becoming are leaning towards adulthood, right? They're figuring out their own sense of identity, and the parental control tends to weaken or lessen, even if the parent does not want that. Teenagers, adolescents crave social acceptance. And one stat that was interesting from the textbook says 3 in 4 U.S. friendships that started in 7th grade dissolve by the end of 8th grade. So it's really showing that it's a tumultuous time, and that craving for social acceptance can be a really hard path, as a lot of those friendships aren't very stable, and that disconnection socially can increase a risk for depression and substance use. So speaking of that early development, those that tend to have early maturation, meaning puberty hits sooner, they're actually at higher risk for substance use, delinquency, and premature sexual activity. And this is generally because their physical body has developed, but their social emotional is developing at a normal pace, and it's just not on the same timeline as their physical development. And this risk actually is greater for those that have that higher reactivity temperament. Girls who physically mature faster are at increased risk for bullying because of all of those things I just mentioned. Frontal lobe development, as you probably know, it lags behind until it's not fully developed until about age 25, which means that impulse control, so you have the hormone surge, you have the limbic system developing, that emotional regulation is increasing, and so there is a higher risk to engage in risky behaviors. Now, the thing that people tend to think is that teenagers just don't understand the risks. Teenagers tend to actually understand the risks. What they have a harder time with is the impulse control, how good it feels, the sensation. If you look at impulse control ability here, right? You have much more impulse control as your frontal lobe develops. That's the part of your brain that says, hey, wait a minute, let me think this through, right? And so you have this combination, right? Like, let's look at 16, 17 years old. Your impulse control is still quite low compared to the rest of your life, and your sensation seeking is high, right? So those things that are going to give you more adrenaline, you're most at risk for at this point. This is one of the reasons, not the only, there's many, why nicotine companies target teens. It's also to get like a lifelong consumer. So because it's very addicting. 2005, so because of this whole frontal lobe development, the more we understood about that, they made a case, the APA, the American Psychological Association, along with 7 other organizations, helped to provide a case that juveniles should not be given the death penalty. And in 2005, by a 5-4 margin, Supreme Court declared that death penalty for juveniles is unconstitutional. And the reasoning was it's less guilty by reason of adolescence, right? So for all those things I just explained. And in 2012, the APA offered similar arguments against mandatory sentencing of juveniles, like life without parole. And once again, the court did agree by another narrow margin. Okay, so emerging adulthood. So after adolescence, you're in emerging adulthood. And this is the period that's like late teenage years to mid-20s. And it's kind of like you are an adult and like legally you're an adult, but you're not an adult. You still need somewhere to live. You still need health insurance. You still need someone to help you make car payments or pay for college or whatever it is. And so you're not fully independent on your own. If you are, then you're out of emerging adulthood. But if you're not, and we see this emerging adulthood trend actually expanding from previous generations, but then you are in emerging adulthood. It's kind of like this in between. You are an adult, but you're not fully independent. So in the adulthood stages, just real quick, so when I use these terms in class, you'll know what they mean. Early adulthood, 20s and 30s. Middle is 40s to 65, and then late is 65 plus. And this is just one little interesting fact about when we physically peak, right? If you're a pro athlete, baseball player, for example, the peak is like age 27. That's where most MVPs awards are given at that age. But most of us, especially those of us whose daily lives don't require us to play pro baseball, we hardly perceive a decline from age 27 to age 30, for example. So let's talk about physical development in middle adulthood. Physical abilities begin to decline, but again, it's not a noticeable amount. It's imperceivable at that point. Early and middle adulthood, unless you're a pro athlete. Early and middle adulthood, your physical vigor has less to do with your age, and it has more to do with what you choose to do, right? Your exercise routine and consistency, what you eat, like your lifestyle plays a huge role at this stage. A physically fit 50-year-old can run 4 miles with ease, while a sedentary 25-year-old could get winded going up the stairs. So it's all really relative at this point, and it depends a lot on those environmental factors. When we look at fatal accident rates, older drivers appear to focus well in the road, but they attend less to vehicles who are approaching from the side. So they actually are more inclined to get hit that way. And this also has to do with vision and just processing multiple things at once. So you kind of see that lack of like frontal lobe development here, right? Where accidents are higher. And then here where there's all these like sensory issues, but there's also that processing issue of like, they're able to focus intently ahead, but not everywhere all at once as well. So sex-specific changes in middle adulthood. So women have a gradual decline in their fertility. like a 19 to 26-year-old has double the fertility chance from a 35 to a 39-year-old. And then eventually reaching menopause around age 50, where their menstrual cycle stops. Men have a gradual decline in sperm count, testosterone levels, and everything else slows down. Sensory abilities, strength and stamina. So our visual sharpness, as we age, our pupils shrink, and our lens, right, the thing in the outer part here that has to thin or thicken to help us focus our eyes, that becomes less transparent, and it has a harder time thickening and thinning. And so a 65-year-old retina receives only about 1/3 as much light as its 20-year-old counterpart. So as you might already know, vision becomes more difficult. Our muscle strength diminishes. But again, a lot of this has to do with environment to change or to prevent a lot of that muscle loss. Our reaction time slows, and our smell, hearing, and touch all lower. So our life expectancy. So from 1950 to 2015, the world life expectancy at birth increased from age 50 to 73 years old, which is great. And 13% of people worldwide are currently 60 or older. So the UN projects that this is going to, with birth rates dropping, this is going to continue to grow. And it's going to double by 2100. Women tend to outlive men worldwide by 4.7 years. Chronic anger and depression will increase the risk of premature death. So again, healthy habits, whatever you can do to prevent your risk for these things is going to make a meaningful impact. They also talk about here the death deferral phenomenon, where when people are to that age, are to that point of dying, that if there's, let's say, Christmas or a major, like a birthday or some major milestone, people tend to hang on in this world for that day. Let's say it's Christmas Day, and then die after that. And so there's tons of statistics to back up the death deferral phenomenon. Okay, when we look at health, so as we age, so in older adulthood, and the older you are, the bad part is your immune system weakens. However, the good part is that you have a lifetime's worth of accumulating antibodies. So you are less prone to catch the cold, but more likely to die from the cold, right? So, less likely to get the flu, more likely to die from the flu, right? Because once you get it, it's harder to fight off. Exercise and aging, I've said this through this whole video, it makes a big difference. It slows aging. Studies using identical twins where only one exercises and the other doesn't really can tease this nature-nurture part apart a little bit. And we see that active older adults are not only physically fit, and physically healthier, but they're also mentally quicker, generally speaking. It's helpful for your telomeres, so that part on the ends of your chromosomes, that is that protective part that it literally it can slow down the degeneration of those. So you age, like your cells are aging slower, right? And you can see that physically in people who are aging well. I mean, look at this guy. He is 92, oldest barefoot water skier. He's 87 in this photo. I'm sorry. He was an age 92 and he's the world oldest. So this photo is from when he was 87. Exercise can reduce brain shrinkage. We know from like memory things that the hippocampus is one of the first things to shrink. So it's very important for protecting your memory as you age, exercise. Okay, so takeaways. Know the difference between adolescence, emerging adulthood, early, middle, and late adulthood. Oops, I have two blank here. Aging minds have longer processing speed, but are not less knowledgeable. Sensory abilities such as vision tend to weaken, and exercise and stress play a very important role in health, especially after age 20. 25. Like 27, we peak if we're the professional athlete, but we won't notice if we're not until much later. So that sums up Mod 3.2b, and I will see you in class.